Good morning, everyone. It's Ajay over here from Bechtle. Welcome to today's webinar on robotic process automation. And this is an exciting new technology that is revolutionizing business processes. And since we discussed AI on our last webinar, we thought, why not keep the trend going and let's keep striving towards that new world of intelligent automation. So before we kick off, just a couple FYIs, and then I'll go on to introductions. So if you have any questions, please use the chat function, which is highlighted in the red box, as you can see. And we're going to cover these off at the end of the session in our usual Q&A style. So who's delivering today's webinar? So in the lineup for today, we have our very own Justin Edhouse, our CTO of Bechtle UK, who's got around 25 years and growing experience in the industry, and I'm sure you've all spoke to him at least once in your time working with Bechtle. And joining us today is also Steve, MD, and David, CTO of our service partner, OnQ. So for those of you who don't know, OnQ is a company who deliver a wide range of services, but they focus on business transformation and improving processes. But one thing we really like about them is that they are big believers in keeping things simple when it comes to RPA. You know, they're focused on reducing the need for complex integrations, doing plug-and-play style pilots, and then identifying the results immediately for your business. So Steve and Dave are also certified consultants in a tool called UiPath, and essentially that's the technology that visually designs your automation, but we're going to come on to that in more detail shortly. So I'm going to hand over to Justin to kick off and explain the structure for today's webinar.
Wonderful, thanks Ajay. Good morning everyone. So yeah, a nice straightforward agenda for today. I'm going to be taking you through the why nows. RPA's definitely growing in the marketplace, so I'll take you through the changes that we're seeing in the marketplace and why it's probably a good time right now. Then I'm going to hand over to the guys at OnQ, and they're going to take you through how the work history is repeating itself, and I'm going to leave that as just that, because Dave will take you through that. What is RPA, and how the inner workings of it work. The delivery process, Steve will take you through. And that's a good time for you guys to think about also where it can help you in your business, and we'll talk to you about that as well. And then we'll go through where to begin, because it's not always clear. So we'll try and give you a good insight as to how you start that journey. So yeah, hopefully a pretty straightforward agenda. So I'll kick off with the why nows. Well, there's actually quite a lot of reasons, and I've got 5 key points on the next slide, which, yeah, I think there's more than just these 5 points, but I wanted to highlight the big ones. So let's talk about the technology. It does go back a very, very long way. Might not have been called RPA. I researched, and there's actually some evidence to say that it was going on back as far as the 60s in the old green screen world as a form of screen scraping. I'm sure many of you have heard of screen scraping. It was, yeah, back in the day, it was a very difficult and cumbersome technique. It was expensive, it became bottlenecked, and was very limited. So it really wasn't adopted well. I think over time that modernized into web scraping. And I even did a project myself for this company, which was a bit of web scraping, and it was a very useful tool because, of course, you could do all sorts of automation commands under the underside with HTML, and it certainly improved things, but that was still a long way from what RPA is now. RPA now is actually a set of extensible tools that it still does screen scraping and web scraping and all those other things, but we've got a whole lot more technology inside of it, so that the tools you're using are more efficient, faster. You can use multiple process workers to make things run smoother. We talk about things like APIs and common data sets and frameworks, and RPA is capable of taking advantage of all those things. So the technology has really, really matured. But that technology mature brings me on to point 2, which is that we all have our own technology shifts, don't we? And I'm sure as people that have been in business for a while, you've probably seen applications come and go. and they become legacy, and you move on to a better, prettier one, or faster one, or whatever the technology shift is for you. But that often leaves behind legacy systems. Well, RPA is great for picking up those older legacy systems and making use of them in one way or another, whether that be data interchange or transfer, data intelligence. There's a whole bunch of things that can be done to help you not only embrace your new technology, but not lose value in your old if you still have it. So yeah, I think that's a really great reason. And I'll talk about some of these new systems in a second, because there's some other advantages as well. Data's the big thing here, though, isn't it? I mean, process automation, it will help you make the most of the data you've got. And we as organizations have a growing amount of data. It's in some organizations, the data growth is absolutely exponential. And sifting through and making sense of that data is absolutely key. But you can't have a person doing it. I'm sure you'd have an exponential growth in people as well if you tried to keep up with your data. So we have to use systems and processes to make the most of data. So RPA allows us to think a little bit more outside of the box and make the most of that. Cloud's an interesting one, because we've all embraced cloud in one form or another. Now we have different clouds. We as a business have multiple clouds we talk about, and RPA can actually join the dots up there. If you've got some clouds that don't speak to each other natively, we can even develop processes that can help you with that. So it's an interesting modern day challenge. We often talk about, how do I move from one cloud to another? How do I, if I've got an app over in one cloud, how do I use that with something I've got on premise? So that multi-cloud approach can be made easier with RPA as well. And then, of course, the one that I was desperately trying not to be too doom and gloom, but right now we have challenges. COVID has caused us challenges, and that means that some of us have less people and the same amount of customers, and various other challenges based on people working from home and in different places. So how do we make that better? How do we carry on being as productive or more productive, even with some of those challenges we're facing within our business? Well, RPA can help with those, removing menial tasks and allowing processes to run more smoothly. So some really great reasons. But as with all things, I will say this, that the limit here is your understanding of your business and what we can do with RPA. So we're now going to move on to David Onque, who's going to explain a little bit more in detail about RPA, and hopefully that will spark a few thoughts in your minds about what you can do with it. So over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Justin. Good morning, everyone. So what is robotic process automation? Well, I like to think of it as something that's whatever you can do with your keyboard and mouse and your computer screen, with your hands, eyes, and to some extent your voice as we move forward, or with your mobile devices, we can automate just about anything that you're doing on that screen. It's sounds quite a challenge, but these days we can do a lot of this integration work. I've been to many organizations where we've got to integrate that piece of data with that piece of data, and somebody comes up with this great idea of the enterprise hub that we're going to build over the next 3 years. The whole thing about robotic process automation is we can do this very, very quickly and demonstrate return on investment rapidly. So what I want to do is have a look back at various industries here, and in particular the car industry, as to what happened with them and why they had to go to a robotic process. Now, the jobs back in the 60s, well, 70s and 80s within the UK car industry, it was a complete disaster. I won't say car crash, but it was a disaster in that the guys on the production lines were bored. They were doing very repetitive tasks, which resulted in poor quality and ultimately very poor customer satisfaction with the products that were coming out. And eventually these companies died or were bought out or You know, companies like British Leyland, Morris, Austin, you know, we all know the disasters that happen with those organizations, and the quality was the key to that, and poor productivity. So what happened in that industry? Well, those tasks were automated, and you know, unfortunately, well, perhaps fortunately for those countries, Germany, Japan were at the forefront of building out the robotic technology to do those repetitive, boring tasks and improve the quality. A lot of people say, well, if those tasks are moved to robots, what happens to the staff? And there's a huge, you know, is there a human cost to this? Well, if you look at the car industry again, what's happened there is that the staff have been upskilled. You know, we see people, and I've seen programs on the robotics that are used by BMW in the Midlands, and the staff are now programming and maintaining those robots. Far higher skilled operations, better work environment, better job satisfaction, and a far better trained workforce, which can only be a benefit for all of us. And if you think about how does that play out in what we're doing with our own environment, perhaps in the office, perhaps our financial systems, our CRM applications, or perhaps our business specific applications, how we can move away from those boring, repetitive tasks. So what are those tasks? And these are some examples of what we typically see. And these are pretty much the low-hanging fruit and very, very easy to use the RPA tools. You know, you may be opening emails, extracting PDFs, extracting spreadsheets, doing something with that data. And the RPA tools can manage that very, very easily. A very typical low-hanging fruit here is processing invoices. You know, these days, we shouldn't have a team of 8, 10, 15, 20 people sat there grunging through those PDF files, entering in that data. Plenty of tools out there to recognize the content of the PDF file, extract the invoice number, the total, the VAT, the address, etc., etc. At the end of each month, how many sales directors sit there copying data from one spreadsheet into the next? You know, their sales team has sent them in the spreadsheet for the end of the month. They've got to take it forward to the board meeting and copy, 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 whatever happened to those great reports that we should be getting out of our CRM tools. And the whole scenario goes on. You know, there are plenty of examples out there. These problems, you know, the generic ones of just copying data around, etc., and invoice processing are part of the what could be tackled. But different industries have very, very specific requirements. I don't know where any of you have been listening into Farming Today this week, but they've had a focus on automation. Now, I know it's not quite robotic process automation that we know as in the software solution with automated robotic milking apparatus, but I heard one earlier in the week where they were taking 45 photographs per second of individual berries and quality controlling them. They had a huge software operation that you know, could identify the good, the bad, the ugly, the different sizes. So huge improvement in productivity because they used to have many, many staff doing it. Huge improvement in quality because staff were getting bored and, you know, the quality checks, whereas the computer didn't get tired, and greater customer satisfaction. So nice example there, but you can go across any of these industries. I'm sure many of us have been involved in insurance claims recently, that flight that didn't happen, that holiday that didn't happen, whatever. So you're involved with insurance companies, and they've come a long way in automating that claims process. You know, you can log into their systems and see where that claims process is. Every time you interact with them, you get an automated reply saying, thank you for this. Sorry, it'll be another 30 days before we come back to you. But yeah, right across the ball here. One other one we're seeing in particular is human resources. That hiring process becomes much more automated. You know, staff have got to fill in this form, fill in that form. Don't forget the pension form, and here's this policy that you've got to sign. All of that can be automated into a process. So lots of options there to take from different industries and automate. These are examples of the companies that are using the UiPath tool that we mentioned earlier. You know, so you're not alone. We've been working with very small companies, perhaps small recruiters who want to do some very basic screen scraping and automate the identification of roles, right through to these larger companies who would typically start off with invoice processing and then realize the benefits and move on and implement RPA tools right across their organizations. We're finding once you start and find a couple of examples, then the ideas start flowing across the organization. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Steve to talk about how we go about the delivery of an RPA project. Steve.
Thank you very much, David, and good morning, everybody. Yes, so Justin has talked about the why, David has talked about the what, and I'm going to talk about how we implement and deliver an RPA project. So for us, David and myself, we've been in the enterprise space for getting on 20, 25 years, came from a sort of Oracle SAP sort of background. And we've seen, you know, a lot of change, particularly in the sort of IT space over that year, but we're very excited about RPA. And again, what we've tried to move away from is these long-winded projects where you have sort of 3 months of analysis and then you get onto your sort of POC and then moving obviously into production. The beauty of RPA is we can speed up that delivery very, very quickly, and the methodology we've designed is all about identifying the value very quickly, looking at ways of finding the processes that are suitable for automation and identifying those very quickly. So what we do up front is we identify the value. So we work with the customers looking at fundamentals like costs, but obviously there's other drivers that you may want to consider, you know, compliance, basically ways of speeding up customer services, those sort of things. So in terms of the first phase, we look at that identifying the value. One new tool which you may be aware of and has sort of come from the data analytics side is a tool called it was basically a process mapping tool. Traditionally, you'd have to do a lot of interviews and talk to people and work through. You'd have to work, you know, with the users to try and identify what they're actually doing with the system. With the process analytics and process mapping tools, we can actually take system data, so we can get factual data. So again, we can actually see how that process is living and breathing within the organization, rather than having to rely on actually how people, you know, think it's working, you know, the subjective approach. Once we've done that and we've found the processes that we want to focus on, again, we look at success. How are we going to measure ourselves? What metrics are we going to use? Is it speed of throughput? Is it making sure it's accurate? Is it reducing cost? Those are the sort of things that, again, as part of demonstrating the value of the automation, we need to look at. We also then move into the solution design, making sure that we identify, you know, the key users and the key sponsors who are going to be, you know, measuring the process. And then what we've also done, again, looking at the proof of concept, rather than the old days of developing a proof of concept, showing that it works, and then almost throwing the baby out with the bathwater and starting all again, what we work on is developing a scalable proof of concept. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about that, but that allows us to go from, you know, the proof of concept into production. And then once we've actually, you know, identified the value, demonstrated the value, how do we prove and provide that ongoing value? So again, making sure that we're still measuring ourselves, we've got key KPIs that we can measure the process against, and also then support as well. Do you want to develop the center of excellence and the capabilities yourself to manage the RPA technology, or do you want somebody like ourselves and Bechtle to actually support you? And obviously then that's a conversation that we have during our sort of journey with you. So I said I'm going to talk a little bit about the scalable proof of concept. Again, what we're not trying to do is boil the ocean, you know, again, going in lots of different directions, looking at lots of different processes. The best thing to do is start with a single process, using a single robot. I'll talk a little bit around that. There is the ability of a single robot to do a single process, a single task, and you can run that 24 sort of by 7. However, as you tend to grow these processes and automate more processes, what we can then start adding is a little bit more complexity using basically an orchestration tool. Now, what that will allow you to do is increase the productivity of your robots, because you can move them off different tasks and different processes at different times of the day. So a bit like the batch processing, from 12 o'clock at night to 6 o'clock in the morning, you can start reassigning the robotic power and making much more use of your robot. So we can use a thing called orchestration there. However, that does add a layer of complexity and also extra license configuration and those sort of things. So again, what we're trying to do with the SPOC, with the Scalable POC, is make it as simple as we can, measure against defined metrics without orchestration. We then tend to find we can deliver that in days, and also with the software we're using, there is no license cost. So again, we can have a trial license. Either we fail fast or we succeed faster. As long as we can show the value, we're not looking for tens of thousands of pounds to get these projects started. And as we go, it's an iterative process that we focus on. So hopefully that's giving you a little bit of an overview of how we actually approach, de-risking the projects, making sure that we're delivering value, and making sure we're meeting the success metrics that we've defined. So within the organization, again, you may have already started your own automation projects. You may have read up on automation, but organizations, every organization is different. Every organization has different systems, different levels of technical debt, different drivers. It's key that we identify those, so again we can understand where the organization strategy is, how can we complement it, how we can support that, how can we work with the organization to make sure that what we're delivering actually meets the drivers. So again, there is a strategic conversation to have within an organization, and again we can help facilitate that. We can work with yourselves. Is there areas that you already tried automation? Is there already places where you feel automation may work? And again, that leads back to the drivers and some of the strategy. Even if a process has been outsourced, and this is an interesting area for organizations that have outsourced to third party, particularly offshore providers, what we're seeing is the reason why they moved from onshore to offshore was to leverage reductions in cost of employees. So if you're paying 60-70 pounds an hour in the UK, and you can offshore to India for 20 pounds an hour, obviously there's a 50 pound saving there. And what we're finding is a lot of the outsourcers now are actually looking to automation, and the reason why they're doing that is obviously they can leverage the productivity gains from automating their processes. However, why not bring those processes back? So we feel, and from the research we've done, there's actually going to be a reshoring, we call it, where processes may be brought back because you can control those processes a lot more effectively, a lot more cheaply and cost effectively, having them onshore and basing them onshore again. So again, that's food for thought. That we are starting to see that, but it depends on obviously the situation you're in. If you are looking at ways of getting work items to people, how many people are working in a certain area? With COVID, are they being distributed and moved away from the office, working from home or other locations? How do you actually get those work items? Dave mentioned particularly around invoices. How do we take a physical invoice that's been posted into an office out to the workers to work on the work item? So again, this can start, and RPA will start driving this digital transformation and program where everything needs to be digital, not physical, and everything then can be supported by an automated process supporting the workforce. In terms of flow of a of a work item. You know, where are the sticking points? Are there places where you know that things get held up, customer service declines, even meeting service levels? Are you going to break any service levels by not adhering to a certain set of rules and making sure either an email acknowledgement has gone out or something has been triggered to make sure that, you know, that work item is still flowing through the workflow? Again, we can start looking at automating those, so people haven't got to keep diving into emails to check that they've had an alert. This can all be done automatically. So in terms of, again, fundamentals, you know, if you are looking at cost reductions, we have a process cost calculator that we can use, and again, invoicing is a very low. If you are still doing manual invoicing or PDF invoicing, coming in and getting that data basically scraped off an invoice and put into a system, this is a very low hanging fruit, and we can talk about that, and we can give you an indication of what it actually costs to automate. Industry standards say, and these are dollar terms, I think it was $15 is the cost of processing a manual invoice, and you can get that down to under $1 by automating. So if you're processing 10,000 invoices, that's still a saving. If you're starting to process 20, 30, 40,000 invoices, that's something that you may want to look at. And again, we can very quickly show value, show the invoice automation working very quickly. So I think in terms of that's my section. Like I say, hopefully you've understood how we actually implement an RPA project. Again, going back to the core fundamental, it's not about boiling the ocean. Start small, learn lessons very quickly, and then develop. Give your users exposure to RPA, and they'll be the ones that come up with the ideas and the knowledge. So I'll hand back over to Justin. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. That's great. I think what we're trying to say here then is we're talking about the art of the possible for your business. So I think there's a lot we can do together in terms of working with you to understand how RPA can be can empower your business. So I think looking at the challenges around automation and digital transformation, I think it's pretty clear there's lots we can do. The savings, well, you know, there are lots of savings, but that comes from our understanding and your understanding of the cost of those processes in your business, and obviously how we apply it. So we're going to help you. We're going to do the best we can by offering you a free 5-process assessment discovery, and we're going to basically get the guys from OnQ to work with you to help you identify where those processes are in your business, what the cost of them is, whether it's right to automate them, and really get stuck in to understand the challenges and how automation can help you. So everyone on this webinar right now, that is an offer to you. So please consider it. Reach out to your account manager, to myself, to Ajay. There's lots of people here that love to talk to you about RPA and really start your journey. So I guess we'll move on now to the questions. Whilst we've been chatting away, I hope there's been a few questions come in. Ajay, what have we got?
Yeah, so thanks, Justin. So we have had a couple come through. One around legacy applications. So I guess the question really is how does RPA kind of work with legacy applications, and essentially does it?
Hi, it's David here. Well, firstly, the technology. A lot of these legacy applications use perhaps old versions of Java or old HTML, old application servers, which traditionally were quite difficult to detect. Fields on the screen, you want to grab a piece of data, populate a field. So those old legacy applications have been quite a trial for the automating, but there's been such demand for automating old versions of applications, particularly ERPs, where many customers are stuck on a particular version. Having worked at both Oracle and SAP, I know how many customers haven't quite managed to get to the latest version and are on legacy applications, probably non-supported. But the cost of going forward is astronomical. But the RPA tools can now access these and have specific drivers and understanding. It's not just about that field appears at that position on the screen. There's so much more information that these tools can extract now. And perhaps you might have a fairly complex screen with perhaps 30 or 40 fields on. Well, that particular form perhaps now only has 5 fields that are relevant. And the tools we use, we can almost put what I would say is lipstick on a pig, put a very nice front end onto the legacy screen, and the automation takes the data from the simplified screen and populates that legacy screen. So yes, we can give a much better interface, but still use your older legacy applications and business processes that might sit behind them. Anyone else got anything to add there? But certainly we're doing a lot with legacy applications.
Yes, so there was another question around how to start an RPA project. I guess what in terms of what Justin mentioned earlier around the free processes that we're offering for the first 5. So please get in touch for them. Absolutely worth using and seeing if it's of any value. But would you guys add anything further to that in terms of where to start or where to initiate a conversation internally?
Yeah, I mean, we have some very straightforward tools that we can use, which help actually to identify what we call the sort of low-hanging fruit. So it's a very simple. We can even do that over the phone. It's a very simple talk through a series of questions. Picking 5 processes, and then we can actually grade those processes for their suitability in terms of automating. From there, once we've selected a process, all we really need is some screen time, and again we can do remote viewing. We can do a team view where we can take the person who could take us through from 1 to 10 or A to Z or how many steps of the process there are. And basically what we can do is we can screen share with them so we can understand and visually look at what's happening on the screen while they're performing the process. But again, we have a little agent that we can sit into their computer, which actually sits there and records everything, all the screen clicks, all the motion, all the flicks between the screens. And so we can actually then document that process, and that produces what we call a PDD, process definition document. And then that allows us to take that document and design. So again, even for complex processes, to create that PDD is probably maybe 3 or 4 or 5 hours tops. And again, we can do it in, we can stop and we can start. So it's, again, we don't have to do that all in one go. But that gives us a much more fuller understanding of the process. And a lot of organizations don't have that documentation anyplace, so it's an interesting exercise to go through if all you get out of it is obviously the PDD and the defined process. So but then we can take that on to create the robot. As I mentioned, we don't need licensing. All we need is a server. We can install the studio software and the robot, and then we can start configuring the RPA process. So again, it's very quick, light touch, low risk, and we quickly either find whether we can succeed and move on, or we stop and look at something else. But again, that's very rare once we've done that little bit of upfront grading of the process.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. Thank you, Steve. So there doesn't seem to be any further questions, so I'll use this as a chance just to explain what's coming up on the next webinars. Thank you, Dave. So yeah, next up we're talking around device as a service, and our very own Tori West, who heads up our modern workplace pillar, is going to talk around the value of DaaS, why now, and how that could essentially save you guys money going forward. And then we're going to look at 2020 vision with digital surveillance, a little bit of a play on words there. We're going to look at some incredible technology from a company called Vicada and how that's kind of changing the way people are using CCTV, and how, especially now with a lot of smaller but more spread out offices across both local and internationally, how that can work as well. So please get in touch and sign up for those as well. And of course, if you have any feedback, these have all come from customer ideas and feedback, so please share them, and we'll absolutely do a webinar around what you'd like to see as well. So there aren't any further questions coming through, so we will stay on till 11:40, but if you haven't got any further questions, please have a great rest of rest of the day. Enjoy your weekend, and thank you to Justin, Steve, and Dave for hosting today as well.